call the member for Maitland.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise to speak on the Workers' Compensation Amendment Bill 2018. And while this bill is vital for reinstating some protections for workers in New South Wales, still 6 years on there are glaring failings which need to be amended before this bill is passed. The New South Wales Government under coalition leadership has a history of failing injured workers. In 2012, Labor fought to protect workers by opposing the amendments which have now left untold numbers of people suffering throughout New South Wales. Changes to the scheme were unfair, cruel, and did not achieve their stated aims. Like many members, I have had meetings with my constituents, many of them, who have shared their concerns with me about how badly this has affected their lives. The fears so eloquently voiced by my Labor colleagues in the last term of Parliament have been proven true again and again. Thankfully, we have an opportunity to rectify this travesty of workers' rights, and I urge everyone in this place to act to protect, rehabilitate and support injured workers properly in this state. This episode, this backward step for injured workers, the hallmarks of this legislation have been a terrible shame and indictment on this government. While we support aspects of this bill to try and restore some semblance of equity into the system, I have a unique experience and perspective that I would like to share with the House as a former small business owner in the transport industry. Working in a family business, in a business that is seen to be high risk, when my workers were injured, it was someone I cared about, someone who might have even been a member of my own family or my work family, which was just as important to me. That's why, as a coach tour operator, I participated in numerous initiatives in my industry to implement safety management systems legislated by the former Labor government to save lives and to ensure that critical incident management manuals were properly updated, again to save lives. I know that many small business owners live in the hope that an accident will never happen in their workplace. They think that common sense is enough to stop workplace injuries, but this is just not the case. Common sense is no substitute for a proper work health safety policy, just as what this government has delivered for the last 6 years is a poor excuse for a workers' compensation scheme, and it hasn't delivered vital and necessary support for injured workers to help them get back to work or, in the worst case, just back to their lives. I hope that small business owners who have their heads in the sand on this issue never have to face the inevitable situation when there is finally a risk that they had no control over, where a member of their staff, their team, even their family faces significant harm or even death. Unfortunately, we can never guarantee that this won't happen, and how much better to be the employer who has worked to identify risk, who's worked to introduce a culture of workplace safety, who has in place policies and procedures which protect workers, than to be the one who's relied on luck. As a good employer, as good humans, we all want a safe workplace for those we work with. There is no greater asset to a small business owner than those on whom they rely to sell their products or deliver their services. Their staff, their employees, their teams are the lifeblood of their businesses. But beyond that, the close and personal nature of that relationships means that we need proper workers' compensation schemes for when things do go wrong. How does the employer who's done nothing to protect their employees, left them defenceless from injury, then look them in the face, or worse, face their family after a workplace death? Workers' health safety is about everyone in the workplace acting to stop risk and ensuring there's a fair system to help injured workers and the families of workers who die at work to be treated fairly in terms of compensation. And this government has failed on every level to do this. This bill is about how we try and revisit this debacle and reinstate a fair workers' compensation scheme for those who have paid the terrible sacrifice of being injured or even killed at work. Where is the dignity of workers who come into our offices as members of Parliament who have to argue for a greater recognition of their injury in order to achieve a better number so they can achieve proper compensation? An arbitrary number which means the difference between support or no support. An arbitrary number which means the difference between a life of dignity and agency or one that is endured in poverty and spiralling ill health and perhaps death. I have seen this in my own office. I have had these conversations with members of our community, and I have been disgusted at the government for the desperation and lack of dignity that they have burdened injured workers in our state with. I have seen lives ruined because an injury doesn't meet a number, and so there is no support at all. A worker's physical and mental welfare is paramount in terms of their recovery, and we need a system which recognises them from the get-go as someone who is deserving of assistance, a recognition that they are able to be rehabilitated, or a realistic assessment of what can keep them living a meaningful life. Often it is the approach of those who first deal with injured workers which often determines what help they will next seek from others. Where their needs are met, and they are met with respect and care and concern for an injury which is not their fault, they will more likely thrive and get back to work. Where they are met with disdain, disrespect, annoyance and criticism, they are less likely to recover back to being able to make a contribution to our community. As the member for Maitland, one of the hardest aspects for me has been meeting with these many people in my electorate who are suffering at the hands of insurance companies who have been over-empowered by this government and who are now free to act in a manner which would be considered bullying and intimidation in any other industry. This callous behaviour was made all too clear to me after recent communications with a constituent who has requested anonymity, whom I shall refer to as John. John was irreparably injured in a workplace incident in April 2015. His injury was obtained as a consequence of his employer's long-term neglect of safety protocols and has left him without a coccyx. But worse, his story is one where the insurer is constantly trying to avoid paying the claims, avoid paying for the devices, having ongoing fights, having him left unable to commence rehabilitation more than 3 years after sustaining severe lower spinal injuries complicated by infections. Intolerable delays in resolving these ongoing hold-ups with insurance company and with iCare New South Wales. Even the doctor has stated in this case that the, and I quote, ongoing requests for more and more information could be construed as stalling techniques to deprive this man of the quality of life he deserves after sustaining an injury through no fault of his own. I raised this case with the Minister's office 2 months ago, and I'm still waiting on a response. How disgraceful. More and more delays. They just do not care. John has even extended an invitation to the Minister to visit him at his home in Maitland, as he now can no longer travel any more than 30 minutes in a car, to see the mountains of correspondence and reports that John has now amassed regarding his injury and his struggles to get his rehabilitation started. While the proposed legislation seeks to amend the injustices of the past and would try to help someone like John not have this happen to him, there is still more that could be achieved. John is a prime example of someone who will likely never be able to return to work. The extent of his injuries and the delay in receiving adequate care at the hands of the greedy and government-supported insurance company have almost guaranteed this. This case and others like it are the reason why amendments must be made to this legislation. We must add protections such as allowing the Workers' Compensation Commission to conduct a review and make a determination which is not in line with the insurer. It's not enough that this will be implied in the new legislation. People like John deserve better certainty than that. We must be explicit in our wording so people like him will be protected. While this aspect is an important consideration, probably the greatest need for change falls under Section 39 of the current Act, cessation of weekly payments after 5 years. While this section notes for workers with more than 20% permanent impairment, entitlement to compensation may continue after 260 weeks, but entitlement after 260 weeks is still subject to Section 38. This still remains grossly unfair, and we have witnessed that this may not even be adhered to. This government's actions last year, as nearly 2,000 people reached the 5-year cut-off date between September and December and were unceremoniously dumped from receiving competition right before Christmas, was an absolute disgrace. Mr Speaker, I'd like to ask for a small extension of time.
The question is the member's time be extended. All those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The member for Maitland.
Thank you. With the 6 acknowledged deaths as a consequence of Section 39, at least 13 incidents of self-harm, amendments are imperative. You need to save lives. Most disturbingly, Section 39 requires a pre-prepared statement from CIRA to families who are grieving the loss of a loved one to suicide. When we need to give people a form of words of how to deal with the death of these people under legislation, I am just astounded, and I cannot believe the cruelty and heartlessness of this government. It is my objective to protect the people like John in my electorate and the rest of the state. I want to be clear that this whole process of reform of workers' compensation, as it was called by the New South Wales Liberal National Government, has been fundamentally flawed from the start. They come to this as would they come to all matters that impact on small business with clear interests of the big multinational firms at heart. Time and again we see them place these interests of ordinary men and women who are in small businesses and the ordinary men and women who work for them at the bottom. And we want to ensure that small businesses are able to work with their workers and ensure that they are properly compensated when injuries happen. These changes were founded on the false premise that the scheme was in significant debt, based on 100% of claimants making 100% maximum claim for money in the immediate weeks. But the reality was that the scheme was only in a temporarily poorer position as a result of the global financial crisis. It was all flawed assumptions. But this has happened. And so what is the legacy of this process? Workers who have been left on the scrap heap without any assistance from this government, and the money's high premiums, in fact, that have been paid by small businesses which have not been paid out to their workers. That is theft. For example, I owed a small business when where our workers' compensation premiums came to the tens of thousands of dollars every year. How terrible was it for me when I had an employee who had a car accident on the way home from work in the rain. When I got that phone call from her, I was so relieved, and I cannot express that actual absolute relief when I found that she had not been injured in that. It flashed through my mind, what would I do if one of my employees had left their workplace and had been injured in a car accident, and because of the changes by this government, she would not have been covered. Journey claims must be restored, and in areas such as mine, where we have people who are working on extremely long hours through shift work, we need to include them in there to make sure that employers are properly mitigating the risk. This government has the chance, just once, to do the decent thing and to reverse some of these disastrous changes that have destroyed lives across this state, that have destroyed lives of innocent workers. They must take on board our amendments and restore some sense of justice to this scheme. Thank you.
Good job.
The question is that